welcome back, everyone. Well, I'm going to go into some interesting stuff today. I want to talk about the plans that are being worked on right now to block out the sun. And no, this is not The Simpsons and Mr. Burns planning to block out the sun. This is about individuals, including Bill Gates, financing research at Harvard University, research being done, being backed by the World Economic Forum for giant space bubbles. I'm not even joking. And very weird things like this. This ties into solar geoengineering, is the technical word for blocking out the sun. And part of the idea is to mimic the effect of of volcanic ash. If there were to be a large volcanic explosion, there would be volcanic ash that would block out the sun. And that's happened in history. It's credited with killing many, many, many millions of people. But I'll get into this today and how they're actually looking into this. And one of the this has been around for a bit now, so I want to get into some of the history on it. But I also want to talk about some of the latest things on it, because right now they're trying to figure out how to create policy to manage this type of act. That policy is not about banning it. That I should be clear on this. The policy is not about banning it. The policy that they're looking into is making sure that not just anybody can do it. They want to make sure that there's just a few select people who can do it, which would include, very likely, the individuals we'll be talking about today. Just as a caveat to this, I'm not getting into conspiracy territory. I'm going to be sticking strictly to scientific journals, scientific papers, direct websites of these organizations, and to even some establishment media that are talking about this. So that said, let's get into it. First of all, though, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about the Nord Stream pipeline. We're still waiting on details for this. Long story short, the undersea pipeline that bypasses Ukraine, the Russian pipeline, mysteriously was destroyed. There was reported seismic activity suggesting it was an explosion. There's photographs of the gas boiling up to the surface, and there's a lot of now controversy because Biden talked about the possibility of destroying that pipeline, as did other members of countries that are opposed to Russia. Russia is, of course, being blamed for destroying its own pipeline, but people are saying it's counterintuitive given the fact that it shut down its other Nord Stream pipeline. Basically, just by saying, "Oops, there's an error." They don't need to blow it up. In fact, blowing it up means they lose that lifeline, whereby they could gain influence over a lot of Europe. People, because of this, are saying they believe that the United States or another country may have actually destroyed it. The concern with this is that whether it was Russia, whether it was another country, if it was in fact destroyed through hostile means, and there was U.S. military drills right alongside it, looking funny enough at the use of undersea drones for military operations, and looking directly at how to conduct operations that would seem to be very much like this. Were a country to have done this, it could constitute an act of war. The other big thing is that the exact same day that the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed, another pipeline was started, this one bypassing Russia, being done with Poland. Now, we're still waiting on details on this, so I don't want to get too far into speculation or whatever, but that's generally what we know so far. Next week, maybe I'll do something a little more in depth depending on what comes out. That said, though, folks, let's get into what's happening right now with this idea of solar geoengineering. And it touches on some other issues of geoengineering as well. Things to, for example, remove CO2 from the air, something that might be a bit detrimental to plant life, but they are developing technologies for that as well. Let's get into it, folks. Now, first of all, just talking about this, it's bizarre because it gets into territory that I think a lot of people do write off just instinctively. One of the big ones being that Bill Gates is financing chemical trails delivered by airplanes to blot out the sun. And people, when they hear that, they think, isn't a chemical trail left by an airplane, vapors in the stratosphere, isn't that a chemtrail? And think what you will. I'm going to show you their actual papers on this stuff. They're claiming this is different because people think chemtrails are left by airplanes, when in reality you would need to go much higher into the stratosphere to have anything stay very long. Now, scientists are noting these are not chemtrails. This is just technology they're building to leave chemical trails in the sky delivered by airplanes, which would control the weather by blotting out the sun. I'm not even joking. Let me show you but first this story from Bloomberg. And this is recent. This is from February. Bloomberg said this: "What if we blotted out the sun to fight global warming?" This is Bloomberg News. And Bloomberg is saying, "We like to think we cover the big stories around here, so today's newsletter is leading with the one question on everyone's mind. What is Tom Brady doing in retirement? What can be done to stop the slow climate change? One of the great hopes is something called solar geoengineering." And get used to that keyword, folks, because that's what they call it. Solar geoengineering. And they say it's essentially an attempt to figure out a way to cool the planet by deflecting some of the sun's rays before they reach us humans. The science isn't there just yet, but a group of scientists argue it should be banned now. And they are not wrong that it is a risky and last resort proposition. Clara, one of these researchers, argues it's terrifying and terrible in a way that chemotherapy is. We don't want it, but can we deny ourselves the possibility? Now, that's where the caveat with this is. And I want to be clear as we go into the way they're trying to regulate it. There are groups right now calling for certain bans on solar geoengineering. But the important part with that is that they're not really talking about banning it outright. They're talking about regulating it. They're not talking about getting rid of it. The way of regulating it would essentially mean that they allow it, but they have maybe certain different regulations countries have to follow and so on that would make it more difficult were someone to do this. Now, let me show you another story here, folks. Actually, before we go into it, let me give a quick thing. So, we do have a sponsor today before I go deeper into this. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, inflation is at its highest level in 40 years. Interest rates are skyrocketing, and a recession now looms ahead of us. Caught between runaway inflation and a recession, our retirement accounts are now in real danger, and it's becoming more so. If you want to protect your future, you can call American Hartford Gold. They can show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. All it takes to get started is a short phone call, and they'll have physical gold or silver delivered right into your IRA or 401k, and they also make it easy to do that. They have an A-plus rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. Now, if you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver on your first qualifying order, as well as a free safe. So don't wait. Call them now. That's 877-260-2764. That's 877-260-2764. Or you can also text Joshua to 65532. Now, folks, a bit further into this, and I debated on whether I should even do this episode because, frankly, I think people just instinctively think this stuff is crazy. I personally would think this stuff is crazy, but people are doing crazy things these days, and there's no getting around it. And you have some major organizations backing this technology. And let me show you, I mentioned that they're talking about banning it. The new debate right now, what makes this kind of a news story, is they're talking about banning it. But, again, there's a caveat to that. I think it's extremely misleading when media say they're talking about banning it, because if you read the content of what they're actually saying, they are not talking about banning it. This is creating government protocols and government regulations on it that will still allow it. Let me show you another story on it. This is Bloomberg again. It says solar geoengineering research is a risk worth taking. In other words, while they might ban the deployment of it, they're still allowing the research on it, to at least currently. And they're saying this, right? It starts with this apocalyptic scene that Bloomberg is laying out. And they say apocalyptic scene is open. The Ministry of the Future, the latest novel by science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson. India is hit with a calamitous heat wave. One so sweltering with humidity so high that bodies struggle to sweat and therefore to survive. Thousands die in the sun-heated waters of a lake where they had sought refuge. In the end, 20 million perish. And they say further in, solar geoengineering covers a range of proposals to cool the Earth by reflecting some sunlight back into space, including with stratospheric aerosol injection, as in Robinson's novel. Now, let me get a bit deeper into this. So basically they're using a novel right now to predict what global warming, I guess they don't call it, they call it climate change now, what climate change might look like were climate change to ever cause the apocalyptic scene they believe it will. I won't get into the loopholes within climate change because that needs a whole episode. Maybe I'll get on some experts to talk about that. But they're using essentially what is a conspiracy theory, frankly, an actual debunked conspiracy theory in the truest sense of the word, climate change, as the basis to create technologies, ironically, that could probably kill a large number of people on the planet, funny enough. And the important part with this is they're not talking about banning the practice. Again, let me show you this, right? WIRES, this is one of the organizations on this, one of the papers on this. It says Solar Geoengineering, the case for an international non-use agreement. And let me show you kind of what the technicalities are of the alleged ban, because it's not really a ban. This is regulations to prevent the use of it, at least immediately, but to allow research on how to do it. The important part is they would not want to launch this immediately were they to do it. They would have this basically sitting on the side like the nuclear bomb in case the climate emergency ever struck and they felt the need to deploy it. Now it says this, solar geoengineering is gaining prominence in climate change debates as an issue worth studying. For some, it is even a potential future policy option. We argue here against this increasing normalization of solar geoengineering as a speculative part of the climate policy portfolio. We contend in particular that solar geoengineering at planetary scale is not governable in a globally inclusive and just manner within the current international political system. So they're saying it would need to be done with equity. It needs to be inclusive. One part of the world cannot be affected differently than another part of the world. We all need to suffer the slings and arrows of climate policy together, is what they're saying. And they say, we therefore call upon governments of the United Nations to take immediate and effective policy control over the development of solar geoengineering technologies. They want the United Nations to step in as the global manager for technologies on solar geoengineering. Now, they state further in something that I found to be very curious because they talk about other technologies they're developing similar to this, but frankly don't get nearly as much attention. It says solar geoengineering differs from an alternative set of technologies that would remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Something that, again, they call carbon dioxide in the atmosphere the cause of global warming, climate change. But of course, many things rely on carbon dioxide to breathe, like plants, which would be extremely detrimental to the world were they to just suck all the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But that's another issue. But they say both approaches are sometimes together referred to geoengineering or climate engineering. So if you hear the terms geoengineering or climate engineering, this is what they're talking about. And they say, our focus here is solely on solar geoengineering. And further in, they state this. In other words, they're not even addressing the idea of sucking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They say the most prominent proposal is the injection of aerosols into the atmosphere to inhibit the influx of solar energy. And further in, they state the idea of solar geoengineering is gaining traction in a few industrialized countries. In March 2021, for instance, a report by a committee of U.S. National Academy of Sciences concluded that the United States should establish, ideally in international collaboration, a research program to assess the feasibility of solar geoengineering as a stopgap measure for addressing anthropogenic climate change. That's the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine 2021. Individual researchers in the United States have called for a globally organized, mission-driven research program on solar geoengineering and for a special IPCC report on this topic. Harvard University has set up a solar geoengineering research program that plans, among others, a stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment to study the behavior of stratospheric aerosols. What does that mean? They want to fly big airplanes and leave chemical trails that spraying aerosols into the atmosphere that have a reflective property to them that can stay in the atmosphere for about a year. Ironically, because those of you, probably most of us here, probably remember the early days of the climate change narrative where they said there was a hole in the ozone layer and it was being caused by aerosols. You'd think that spraying aerosols directly into the stratosphere would make the problem worse if what they're claiming is actually true, right? Why would you, if aerosols were burning a hole in the ozone layer, as we were told most of the time I was growing up at least, why would they spray aerosols like directly into the thing that they're trying to protect from aerosols? It doesn't make any logical sense, but that's what they're saying. Again, the logical sense is that, frankly, the narrative's a bunch of nonsense, but that's another topic. And they say this as well. In short, in some expert circles, solar geoengineering is now seen as a legitimate research topic and potential future climate change policy option or climate policy option. That's the official stance, folks. This is now viewed by many organizations, and there's proposals to have the United Nations manage it directly, as a future climate policy option. And they are developing the technologies for this. Now, as the report mentions, this isn't also just about blotting out the sun. This is also, again, climate engineering and other types of geoengineering, including removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And as a brief caveat to this, let me show you that program, because I want to just briefly mention that one and then go back into solar geoengineering. But just to kind of show you the other technologies being worked on alongside this, there are other things as well. Science Daily in 2021 had an article about this. They say effectively removing CO2 from the atmosphere. And Science Daily says this: researchers at the Paul Schuer Institute, PSI, and ETH Zurich have investigated the extent to which direct capture of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the ambient air can help to effectively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. The result? With careful planning, for example, with regard to location and provision of the necessary energy, CO2 can be removed in a climate-effective manner. The researchers have now published their analysis in the journal Environmental Science and Technology. Further in, they state direct air carbon capture and storage. That's what they call it. Direct air carbon capture and storage, or DACCS. They say it is a comparatively new technology for removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, since it would allow large amounts of CO2 to be, in effect, trapped. This technology could also reduce the greenhouse effect. Now, I should note that most of this is, of course, just, again, basically a big climate apocalypse conspiracy theory, that they believe this stuff is causing a disaster when actual data over the course of a long period of time shows it's not. But regardless, this conspiracy theory, which is what it is being used to create really destructive technologies, things that, if deployed, could have detrimental effects on the earth, on plant life, and on human life. And let me show you some of what's being worked on. I want to show you the actual technology Bill Gates is launching with this, or planning to launch with this. Bill Gates' involvement with this and there's many groups involved, but he's directly financing some of the research being done at Harvard, the one on deploying aerosols into the stratosphere. I don't know if YouTube's going to ban us for this, honestly. But look, I'm not even showing you any kind of conservative media. I'm only showing you today establishment media. CNBC is the one that actually has a story on Bill Gates' plan with this. And I'm only showing you scientific journals and scientific papers. So I'm not getting into anything that I believe is controversial, but you never know with YouTube. That being said, I think we should jump exclusively to Epic TV because YouTube has been coming at our throats lately, unfortunately. But Again, folks, one of the reasons why we made Epic TV in the first place was because YouTube was censoring us. They've already given us a strike not too long ago, and they just out of the blue completely deleted the Crossroads highlights channel. And so I would like to keep the Crossroads main channel for as long as possible, because I know a lot of you do watch it there. But really, there's a lot we cannot talk about on YouTube. So if you want to stick with this, come over to Epic TV, because I'm going to cut exclusively to Epic TV now, so I don't have to walk a fine line with YouTube if we do that. So let's jump over, and then I'm going to show you the video that CNBC actually has, the promo video on how this technology would be deployed. Literally, ironically, doing what the conspiracy theorists claim people are doing, which is spraying chemical trails directly into the atmosphere. It's wild stuff. They actually have a video of it. I'll show you in a minute. Before we jump over, though, folks, we have a new documentary, not me, but Epic Times, on Epic TV. It's called Under the Skin. It's about vaccine industry and some of the safety issues with it. I think it's an interesting documentary. If you haven't seen it yet, let me show you a quick trailer of that before we jump over.
What if he gives you HPV?
I chose to get vaccinated because I'll do everything I can to help protect myself from cervical cancer.
It sounded very cool how there can be a cure for cancer.
She was just a normal 12-year-old girl. Hi. She always told me, Mama, I love my life. But she has been lying in bed for 3 years now.
These are very large particles in these vaccines. There's a lot of aluminium associated with large particles.
We were not informed about the use of aluminium.
We have not found any evidence that these adjuvants have ever been tested for safety.
It was both exciting and frightening to have a test where there was an answer. There's something that should not be in your blood, but you have it.
Yeah, folks, it's an interesting documentary. It's worth watching. It's about aluminum and the effects of aluminum in these vaccines and what that does to people based on some scientific studies from Denmark and Germany. That said, let's jump over to Epic TV because I want to show you this video that they have of how this solar geoengineering technology would work, which ironically is exactly what people have been saying they're doing, and it's wild, and I want to show you it, but I don't know if YouTube will delete our video or whatever for this or give us a strike. So let's jump over to Epic TV. Click the link below the video if you're on YouTube or Rumble. I'll see you on Epic TV, and we'll talk for a good while still. So come over. All right, folks. Now, those of you curious, today's tea is a white tea. It's called Silver Needle, and it's very